Some stories are too powerful to be lost to time. A young storyteller named Elara feels this truth deep in her soul. She lives in a quiet coastal village, a place where the ocean's whispers are a constant companion. Elara has decided to do something brave. She will record the forgotten tale of Atlantis for her village's archive, hoping to save its ancient wisdom before it vanishes forever. Her goal is to create a living history, a gift for future generations, but she does not yet realize that some truths, once uncovered, can never be buried again. By the end of this journey, you will discover the profound lessons, a lost civilization left for us all. What secrets lie hidden beneath the waves, waiting for a single listener to awaken them? And what price must be paid when the past finally answers? I would love to know if you feel comfortable sharing where you are listening from and what the local time is for you right now. What memory from your own life feels powerful enough to be passed down through generations? The first light of dawn painted the sea in strokes of gold and violet as Elara slipped into the hidden cove. She moved with a quiet reverence, the worn conch shell cool and familiar in her palm. This was her grandmother's ritual, a way to listen not just to the water, but through it. Pressing the shell's opening to her ear, she closed her eyes and let the world fall away. The usual roar of the surf softened into a murmur, a chaotic symphony of waves and wind. Then, beneath it all, she heard it. A faint, melodic hum wove through the noise, a rhythmic pulse that felt ancient and deliberate. Her breath caught. It was the pattern her grandmother had described, the legendary cadence of Atlantean song. A thrill shot through her, bright and electric, followed immediately by a cold trickle of dread. This was real. The legends held a truth, and she was the only one who could hear it. Her mind raced with the weight of it. To share this could rekindle a sense of wonder in her village, a connection to a past they had all but forgotten. But what if her discovery was met with laughter or fear? What if it shattered the simple, predictable peace they all cherished? The silence of the cave felt heavy with the choice. She looked from the shell in her hand to the empty journal beside her. No, she decided. This secret was too fragile, too new. She had to protect it, to understand it alone first. Trusting the pull in her chest over the voice of caution, she opened her journal and began to draw, translating the hum's rhythm into a spiraling pattern of lines and dots. As her charcoal stick moved across the page, the hum seemed to respond, growing subtly louder, more distinct. It was no longer a distant echo, but a presence. The realization washed over her, chilling and exhilarating. She was not just listening to the past, she was awakening it. Something that had slept for millennia was stirring because she was here, because she was listening. Tucking her journal safely into her satchel, she prepared to leave the cave. That was when she saw it. In the shallow tidal pool at her feet, the water began to shimmer with a soft, otherworldly blue light. Tiny phosphorescent tendrils swirled, not randomly, but as if tracing the very pattern she had just drawn, forming a luminous path that led deeper into the cave's dark mouth. The ocean was not just speaking, it was showing her the way. The luminous trail pulsed with a soft, inviting rhythm, pulling Elara deeper into the cavern. The path of light led her through a narrow, damp passage that opened abruptly into a larger chamber. and there it was, a grand stone archway, submerged in a shallow, crystal-clear pool, rose from the water. Its surface was a tapestry of intricate carvings, worn by time and tide, but still telling a silent, epic story. She could see the shapes of towering crystalline cities, vessels that sailed not on the waves but beneath them, and people with forms that seemed to flow like water themselves, living in perfect symbiosis with the ocean. Her breath hitched. This was it, the proof she had scarcely allowed herself to dream of. Without a second thought, she stepped into the cool, ankle-deep water, her heart hammering against her ribs. Reaching out a trembling hand, she pressed her fingertips to the cold, wet stone. The moment her skin made contact, the carvings shimmered with the same ethereal blue light that had guided her here. A wave of warm, resonant energy surged up her arm, not a shock but an embrace. Her vision blurred, and for a breathtaking instant, she was no longer in a cave. She stood on a wide, sun-drenched terrace, overlooking a city of impossible beauty. Towers of pearlescent material spiraled towards a sky, visible through the shimmering water above. Luminous sea creatures swam alongside people in the streets, and a chorus of harmonious song filled the air, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy. The vision vanished as quickly as it came, leaving her gasping in the dim cave, her hand still pressed against the archway. A fierce, desperate hope warred with a chilling wave of doubt within her. Was that a true memory of Atlantis, a gift from the past, or was her own longing crafting these beautiful illusions for her? She so wanted it to be real, and that very desire made her distrust the experience. She pulled her hand back, the warmth lingering on her skin like a phantom touch. Closing her eyes, she focused on the feeling of that perfect harmony, the profound peace of the vision. It felt more real, more substantial than the cold stone beneath her feet. She made her choice. She would trust it. This archway was not just a monument. It was a message, and she would dedicate herself to decoding it, line by line, symbol by symbol. It held the key, not just to a forgotten history, but to understanding how such a magnificent civilization could simply disappear. As this resolve solidified within her, a profound silence fell over the chamber. The gentle lapping of water against the rocks ceased. The salty ocean breeze that had whispered through the cave moments before simply died. The water around the archway became a sheet of perfectly still, dark glass, the unnatural calm feeling less like peace and more like a held breath. Something was watching. Something ancient had taken notice of her intrusion. Then, a soft scraping sound broke the stillness. A single, flawless seashell, glowing with a gentle inner light, washed up onto the dry stone at the edge of the pool. Elara knelt and picked it up. Its surface was etched with a perfect, spiraling pattern that mirrored the central design on the stone archway. It was no accident. It was an invitation, a sign that the first door had been opened, and a deeper, more dangerous knowledge now awaited her. The luminous shell felt warm against Elara's palm as she hurried back to her cottage, the salt air clinging to her clothes. She bolted the door and lit a single candle, its flame casting long, dancing shadows across the room. Setting the shell on her wooden table, she opened her journal to the spiraling pattern and began to hum the Atlantean rhythm softly, her voice unsteady at first. The shell responded instantly, emitting a gentle, harmonic frequency that filled the small space, a sound like distant wind chimes and deep ocean currents woven together. Then something shifted. Faint, echoing voices wove through the air, speaking a fluid, musical language she had never heard, but somehow understood. They spoke of marketplaces filled with glowing fish, of children learning geometry from shifting sand patterns, of a society where every action was a note in a grand, communal song. A profound connection washed over her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. These were not just ghosts. They were people, with lives and laughter, and she was the first to hear them in thousands of years. But with that connection came a cold, creeping fear. What if she lost herself in these echoes? Each whisper was a thread pulling her deeper into their world, and she could feel the solid reality of her own life. Her duties, her friends, the simple sunrise over the village beginning to feel thin and distant. This was a siren's call not from rocks, but from time itself, and she feared becoming an echo in her own life, a listener forever trapped between two worlds. The choice was stark. She could close the shell, lock it away, and return to the safety of the known, or she could answer. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Elara made her decision. She would not turn away. She cleared a small space on her floor, arranged the shell and her journal, and sat in reverent silence, ready to document every fragment they chose to share. She would be their scribe, their voice. She would make their memory matter again. As she listened, the voices grew clearer, their tones shifting from nostalgic reminiscence to something more pointed and urgent. They were not just broadcasting memories into the void. They had been waiting. They had been waiting for a listener with a heart open enough to hear them. And now that she was here, their story was ready to be fully told. The weight of that expectation settled on her shoulders, a responsibility as vast as the ocean. That night, exhausted from the emotional torrent, she fell into a deep and vivid sleep. She dreamed of a grand, crystalline library, its shelves curving like nautilus shells, filled with books that pulsed with soft, inner light. It stood at the heart of the sunken city, a repository of all Atlantean knowledge, and she knew, with a dreamer's absolute certainty, that the answers she sought were held within its walls. She awoke at dawn, with the image seared behind her eyes and a single, unwavering conviction. She had to find a way to reach it. The dream of the library was a beacon she could not ignore. Elara knew the stories of her village were not enough to guide her to such a place. She needed a different kind of wisdom, one born from a lifetime of facing the ocean's mysteries. And so she found herself climbing the winding path to the cliffside hut of old Nereus, a man whose face was a map of sea winds and salt spray. He was mending a net when she arrived, his movements slow and deliberate. She spoke of her research, of a submerged library, choosing her words with care. Nereus listened, his ancient, knowing eyes fixed on her, and when she finished, he set his net down with a soft sigh. He told her of the tide callers, ancient guardians of oceanic lore, who moved like shadows in the deep. They were not men, nor were they mere spirits, but something in between, and they only guided those whose hearts resonated with the true song of the sea. Reaching into a leather pouch, he brought out a single, wave-worn stone, black and impossibly smooth. He pressed it into her palm. To earn their guidance, he explained, she must place this stone in the tidal pool beneath the hunter's moon and wait. It was a test of her sincerity, a measure of her connection. A cold dread coiled in Elara's stomach. What if her connection was just imagination, a fantasy she had built in a lonely cave? Failing this test would mean losing her only lead, the thread that connected her to the library and the voices within the shell. And the tide callers themselves, what were they? Were they benevolent guides, or were they like the old tales of Fae, creatures with alien morals who could demand a terrible price for their knowledge? The stone felt heavy in her hand, a tangible weight of consequence. She looked from the stone to Nereus's weathered face, and she made her choice. She closed her fingers around it, accepting the challenge. Nereus's final warning echoed in her mind as she descended the path. The tide callers are discerning, he had said. They do not test strength or courage, but empathy and wisdom. They may ask you to understand the grief of a whale or the patience of a coral polyp. The risk was not to her body, but to her very spirit, demanding a depth of understanding she wasn't sure she possessed. Later that night, under the cold, brilliant light of the full moon, Elara stood at the edge of the designated tidal pool. The world was painted in silver and shadow. Her heart was a steady drum against her ribs, a stark contrast to the frantic whirl of her thoughts. She knelt, the cold seawater soaking through her trousers, and with a final, steadying breath, she placed the smooth, black stone into the center of the pool. It settled into the pale sand without a sound. For a long moment, nothing happened. The water remained still, reflecting only the impassive face of the moon. Then, a single, perfect ripple emanated from the stone, moving outward in an ever-widening circle that did not fade. The ripples did not fade but held their perfect, concentric form on the water's surface, a silver latticework under the moon. From their very center, the water itself began to rise, gathering and flowing upward into a slender, graceful figure. It was a being of liquid light and shifting currents, its form both there and not there, a presence that filled the air with the scent of deep ocean and quiet rain. Elara stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat, as the tide caller turned its gaze upon her. There were no eyes, yet she felt its attention like a physical weight, a profound and ancient stillness that saw straight through her. No words passed between them. Instead, a cascade of images flooded her mind, vivid and overwhelming. She saw the delicate symmetry of a coral reef, a perfect balance of life. She felt the crushing, silent grief of a sunken city, a memory of profound loss, and then she understood the solemn, endless work of preservation, the duty of holding a story safe through the ages. In that moment, every secret hope, every flicker of doubt, every selfish thrill she had felt in the cave was laid bare before this serene judge. It was not her courage being tested, but the purity of her heart's intent. The weight of its judgment was immense, and she knew a single selfish thought would shatter the connection forever. Driven by a need to be truly seen, Elara's hands moved without conscious thought. She unclasped her journal, the pages fluttering open to her careful sketches of the stone archway, her transcriptions of the hum, her spiraling patterns. She did not hold it up as proof, but offered it openly, a humble tribute. This was not for her, she tried to convey through the storm of feeling. This was for them, for the voices in the shell, for the memory that deserved to be more than a whisper. She was giving her work, her purpose, back to the past it belonged to. The tide caller's form seemed to soften, the light within it warming from cool silver to a gentle gold. It extended a hand of flowing water, and over Elara's open journal, a single, pearlescent compass condensed from the mist above the pages. It settled onto the paper, cool and solid. As her fingers closed around it, she understood its nature. The needle did not seek the North Star, but quivered, pointing insistently inland, toward the oldest, most forgotten parts of the island. It did not point to a place, but to a story, to a resonance of history waiting to be felt. This was not a map for conquering, but for listening. With a final, silent nod that felt like a blessing, the tide collar dissolved into a shimmering mist that settled back into the pool, leaving the water perfectly calm. The black stone was gone. Elara stood alone under the vast sky, the compass heavy in her hand. As she looked up, the stars seemed to pulse with a new intensity, their cold light now feeling like a chorus of silent approval. The path was open, but it demanded a pilgrim, not a conqueror. Her journey into the heart of the legend was no longer a search, but a sacred trust. The pearlescent compass pulled Elara away from the shore, its needle a steady, insistent guide. She expected it to lead her to another sea cave, or a hidden stretch of coast, so its unwavering direction inland was a complete surprise. It drew her deep into the island's quiet heart, through a forest of ancient, moss-draped trees, until she arrived at a place she had only heard of in old village tales. A forgotten freshwater spring bubbled up from between the roots of a great willow, its water impossibly clear, shimmering with a soft, internal light. This was a nexus, a place where the energy of the deep earth and the flowing water were said to merge into one. Kneeling at the water's edge, her fingers brushed against something sharp and smooth, buried in the soft mud. She carefully unearthed not one, but several pottery shards, their edges worn by time. Her breath caught. Fired into the clay were spirals and geometric patterns, the same language of lines she had seen on the stone archway. This was Atlantean. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. How could this be? The legends were unequivocal. Atlantis was a civilization of the sea, a culture born from and defined by the ocean. Its artifacts should lie on the seabed, not here, nestled in a forest spring miles from the coast. Her entire understanding of the myth, the very foundation of her quest, began to fracture and reshape itself. She carefully collected the shards, wrapping them in a soft cloth and placing them in her satchel with a sense of reverence. This was not a contradiction to the story, she realized, but a vital, missing chapter. She vowed then to weave this truth into her retelling, to show that Atlantis was not an isolated island kingdom, but a culture whose wisdom and influence had touched the land as well. Sitting beside the spring, she closed her eyes and let its tranquil energy wash over her, the gentle hum of the place, harmonizing with the memory of the ocean's song. It was a symphony of elements, and she was finally learning to hear all the parts. As her calm deepened, she felt a subtle shift in the weight of the compass. She opened her eyes to see its pearlescent needle had moved, no longer pointing toward the spring, but lifting, aiming unmistakably toward the distant, mist-shrouded peaks of the mountain range that formed the island's spine. A shiver of awe, not fear, ran through her. Atlantis's legacy was not confined to the coast. It was woven into the very bones of the land itself, and her quest was expanding into a scope she had never anticipated. A gentle rain began to fall then, but it was unlike any rain she had ever known. Each drop that touched the leaves, the spring, her skin, carried with it a faint, melodic chime, as if the sky itself was softly singing its approval of the path she now walked. The chiming rain fell like a symphony from the heavens, each drop a tiny bell against the broad leaves of her shelter. Elara closed her eyes, letting the sound wash over her, and the voices from the shell rose to meet it, no longer fragmented whispers but a clear, flowing narrative. They shared a memory of Atlantean explorers, not as conquerors, but as curious guests. She saw them in her mind's eye, trading stories with mountain tribes, demonstrating how to channel spring water into terraced gardens, and learning in return the language of the winds and the secrets of the stars. It was a beautiful, two-way exchange, a weaving of land and sea into a single, vibrant tapestry of knowledge. The profound tragedy of Atlantis was not that it sank beneath the waves. The true loss was the violent snapping of these countless threads of connection, the silencing of a global conversation that had enriched everyone. Her purpose crystallized with a sharp, painful clarity. She was not just an archivist for a lost civilization. She was a weaver, tasked with rethreading those ancient bonds. But could one person, with nothing but a journal and a handful of pottery shards, possibly hope to span such a vast and lonely divide? The weight of it threatened to crush her spirit. The voices had chosen her, but the living people of her village, with their own worries and rhythms, had not. What if they saw this as a foolish distraction, or worse, a dangerous obsession with drowned ghosts? The fear of failure was a cold stone in her chest. Yet, as the harmonious chorus of the rain swelled around her, the answer came not as a thought, but as a feeling. It wasn't about her doing it alone. It was about creating a space where others could remember with her. She would build a gathering place, a simple circle of stones in the village square, where she would share these tales. And she would invite everyone to bring their own family stories, the old legends passed down from their grandparents, the fragments of history that lived in their blood. Perhaps within those shared memories, echoes of that ancient connection still lingered, waiting to be recognized. As if in direct response to her decision, the gentle rain intensified into a proper downpour, the chiming melody growing into a powerful, resonant chorus that seemed to shake the very leaves. The elements were not just approving, they were participating, aligning with her mission in a display of raw, beautiful power. But such a spectacle could not go unnoticed. Through the silver curtain of rain, she saw distant figures pausing in their work, looking up from their windows, their curiosity piqued by the unearthly music falling from the sky. Her secret was beginning to ripple outward. Then, as suddenly as it began, the storm subsided, the clouds parted, and a single, breathtaking rainbow arced across the sky. Its colors did not just shine, they shimmered with that same familiar, ethereal light she had seen in the tide collar and the stone archway. It was a bridge of pure, radiant hope, and its end pointed not toward the mountains or the sea, but directly toward the heart of her own village, guiding her home to begin the real work. The rainbow's end touched the earth right beside Lyra's weaving cottage. Elara found her there, her hands a blur of motion as she worked a simple shuttle through a loom, the rhythmic clack of wood, a familiar village sound. Elara did not speak of tide collars or singing rain at first. Instead, she sat on a low stool and unrolled her journal, pointing to the spiraling patterns from the stone archway and the geometric shapes from the forest shards. She spoke of the explorers who walked the land, not as conquerors but as kin, sharing knowledge with mountain tribes and learning the language of the wind in return. Lyra's hand slowly stilled, her weaver's eye seeing not just lines on a page, but the potential for a story told in thread and color. A deep, quiet understanding passed between them, and Lyra nodded, her gaze turning to a basket of undyed wool. She would not create a simple picture. She would build a loom of connection. The tapestry began to grow, and with it, a quiet marvel unfolded in the cottage. Lyra used threads dyed with seaweed and crushed berries, colors of the deep ocean and the rich earth. She wove in the spirals and patterns from Elara's journal, and as she did, something impossible happened. The threads themselves began to shimmer with a soft, internal light, like sunlight catching the surface of a wave. The patterns seemed to shift and breathe when viewed from different angles, suggesting the flow of water or the growth of a vine. Villagers who stopped by with a skein of yarn or a bit of gossip would find themselves lingering, mesmerized, unable to look away from the living fabric taking shape on the loom. But not all who looked upon it felt wonder. Old Man Hemlock, who remembered every storm and every failed crop, voiced the fear simmering in others. He worried that inviting these old, powerful stories into their daily lives was like opening a door they could not close. What if it changed them? What if it drew the wrong kind of attention from beyond their island, disrupting the delicate balance of their traditions? Elara listened to these fears with a respectful heart. She knew that forcing belief would only build higher walls, so she and Lyra made a decision. They would not argue or lecture. They would host a gathering, a simple evening under the stars where the completed tapestry would be unveiled. It would be a centerpiece, not for a speech, but for an experience. They would share the stories gently, allowing the tapestry's own quiet magic to weave its own spell. As the final threads were woven into place, the energy in the cottage became palpable. The air itself seemed to vibrate, and the tapestry began to emit a soft, resonant hum, the same harmonic frequency Elara had first heard in the conch shell. It was no longer just a representation of the tale. It had become a living artifact, a conduit for the very essence it depicted, humming with the memory of a lost harmony. On the eve of the gathering, a deep calm settled over the village. The moon rose full and brilliant, casting a silver light through the window of the weaving cottage. Inside, the tapestry glowed with an intense, steady radiance, its threads alive with captured moonlight and ancient song. It hung in the silent room, pulsing softly, as if it were a heart beating in anticipation of the unity it was meant to inspire, waiting to see if a village remembered how to listen. The grove was transformed by twilight and the soft glow of 100 candles. Elara stood before the assembled villagers, Lyra's luminous tapestry hanging like a captured aurora between two ancient oaks. At the center of their circle, the pearlescent compass rested on a bed of moss, its surface catching the light. Elara's voice began softly, not with the booming tone of a lecturer, but with the intimate cadence of a friend sharing a secret. She spoke of the explorers who walked the land, of the shared songs between mountain and sea, and of the great library that held not just knowledge, but the very soul of a people. As her words wove through the quiet air, something shifted in the listeners. An old fisherman, his face lined by salt and sun, slowly nodded and began to share a tale his own grandfather had told him, of a strange, kind people from across the water who taught his ancestors to rid the currents by the stars. A young mother then spoke of a lullaby passed down in her family, its melody hauntingly similar to the hum now emanating from the tapestry. One by one, voices rose, each a thread connecting to the other, creating a web of shared memory that stretched back through generations. It was not just Elara's story anymore, it was theirs. But from the edge of the circle, old Hemlock's voice cut through the warmth. "We live good lives here," he said. "The sea provides, the land sustains. Why invite shadows from a world that drowned? Some doors, once opened, cannot be closed." The comfortable silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fear. Elara met his gaze, her heart beating a nervous rhythm. She did not dismiss his warning or argue against his wisdom. Instead, she spoke to the heart of his concern. "I believe the past is not a door to be locked away, but a wound that needs air to heal," she said gently. "When we forget where we came from, we forget a part of ourselves. Understanding what was lost can show us how to better protect what we have now and strengthen the bonds that hold us together." As she spoke these words, the tapestry's gentle hum seemed to swell, harmonizing with the murmur of the villagers' agreement. A soft, golden light began to emanate from the woven threads, spilling out to envelop the entire grove in a warm, embracing radiance. It was not a blinding flash, but a deep, resonant glow that felt like forgiveness, like a long-awaited homecoming for stories that had been wandering in the dark. In that moment, the spiritual reconciliation was palpable, a silent mending of the rupture between past and present. Then, as the light reached its peak, the pearlescent compass at the center of the circle began to spin. It twirled slowly at first, then faster, a silent vortex of potential. When it finally stilled, its needle was no longer quivering aimlessly. It pointed with unwavering certainty away from the grove, away from the safety of the land, and directly toward the vast, waiting darkness of the open sea. The ocean was calling them back, and the deepest truths still lay hidden in the silent world beneath the waves. The compass guided their small boat, not out into the treacherous open ocean, but along the coastline to a secluded inlet, shielded by jagged cliffs. There, rising from the turquoise water, stood a magnificent archway of living coral, its surface a tapestry of vibrant pinks and deep blues. As their boat drew near, the entire structure began to pulse with a soft, internal bioluminescence, the light rippling across its surface in a silent, welcoming dance. The water directly beneath the arch did not boil or churn, but rather parted with an impossible gentleness, receding to reveal a smooth, downward sloping tunnel lined with glowing white stones that vanished into the deep. An entrance to the world below now lay open before them. A wave of palpable fear washed over the small group. One of the fishermen gripped the side of the boat, his knuckles white, his voice a low rumble of doubt. He spoke of unstable sea caves and the crushing weight of the ocean, of currents that could trap a man forever. Another villager, a younger woman who had been so brave in the grove, now stared into the yawning passage with wide eyes, whispering that perhaps some doors were meant to remain closed. The safety of their known world was a powerful anchor, and this glowing path felt like a chain leading into the abyss. Seeing their terror, Elara knew what she had to do. She could not ask them to take a risk she was unwilling to face herself. Placing the compass safely in her satchel, she stood, her voice steady. "I will go first." The tide caller did not lead us here to drown us. It is a test of trust. And with that, she stepped from the boat into the shallow water and walked into the glowing passage. The moment she passed the threshold, the water that had parted so gracefully for them rushed back into place with a soft, final sigh, sealing the entrance completely. The villagers cried out, but their voices were muffled by the wall of water. Elara was alone, yet there was no flood, no panic. She found herself standing in a tranquil, air-filled cavern, the walls dry and warm to the touch. The passage had not been a trap, but a threshold, and it had closed because the journey ahead was for her, and her alone. From deep within the earth, a soft, melodic dripping echoed, each drop hitting a pool of water with the clear, perfect note of a bell. The crystalline walls around her began to pulse in time with the sound, their light guiding her forward into the heart of the mountain. The path of glowing stones led her into a cavern of breathtaking scale. At its center, a heart-shaped crystal, the size of a small cottage, floated serenely above a pool of perfectly still, black water. It pulsed with a soft, internal light, a slow, rhythmic thrum that echoed through the chamber and resonated deep within Elara's own chest, syncing with the steady beat of her heart. The air itself felt thick with memory, charged with an energy that was both ancient and vibrantly alive. Drawn by an instinct she could not name, she stepped forward and placed her palm flat against the crystal's warm, smooth surface. The moment her skin made contact, the cavern vanished. She was swept into a torrent of visions, not of destruction and collapse, but of a civilization at its glorious peak. She saw architects singing to crystals, coaxing them to grow into spiraling towers that channeled sunlight into soft, internal glows. She watched farmers using harmonic frequencies to encourage crops to flourish without ever turning the soil, and healers placing their hands on similar, smaller crystals to mend broken bones and soothe fevers. This was not a story of magic, but of a profound, symbiotic science, a way of living that listened to the earth and the sea and worked in concert with them. The sheer beauty of it was a physical ache in her chest, a crushing wave of sorrow for the depth of what had been lost. How could her simple village, with its struggles and fears, ever hope to understand such harmony? The weight of her responsibility felt immense, a burden too heavy for one person to carry. She was just a storyteller, not a sage or a queen. She pulled her hand away, gasping, her mind reeling from the sensory overload. To process this, she needed to be more than a witness. She needed to become a vessel. Sinking to her knees at the pool's edge, she closed her eyes and began to breathe deeply, deliberately slowing her racing heart. She did not try to grasp the individual visions, but instead opened herself to the crystal's core energy, the underlying frequency of balance and reverence that powered it all. As she meditated, a quiet resolve solidified within her. She would not attempt to rebuild their cities or replicate their technology. She would embody their spirit. She made a silent, solemn vow to carry their values of balance, wisdom, and deep listening into her own life, to live in a way that honored their memory. As if accepting her pledge, the crystal's gentle glow intensified, flooding the cavern with a brilliant, warm radiance. The dark pool beneath it began to swirl, its surface churning until it became a perfect, shimmering mirror. Elara leaned forward, expecting to see her own tear-streaked face reflected back, but it was not her own visage she saw. The water showed her the faces of the Atlanteans, their expressions filled with a profound and gentle gratitude. They were looking back at her, not as a ghost from the past, but as a living person in their present, their eyes holding a recognition that transcended time. A single luminous tear, heavy with the weight of memory and hope, escaped her eye and fell into the swirling pool. The moment it touched the surface, the water stilled instantly, becoming as clear as glass. In its depths, a new archway, carved from white stone and veined with gold, ear-eyes open in the far wall of the cavern, revealing a passage filled with a soft, inviting light. The white stone archway sealed behind her without a sound, leaving Elara standing in a garden grown from memory. Softly glowing moss carpeted the ground, and flowers with petals of shimmering sapphire and emerald light hung from vines that climbed the cavern walls. In the center, a circle of smooth, gray stone benches sat facing a tranquil pool, their surfaces worn smooth by generations of use. The air itself hummed with a profound and gentle peace. Faint echoes shimmered in the stillness, the spectral laughter of children chasing fireflies, the warm murmur of elders sharing stories in the ancient, musical tongue. This was not a place of grand power or lost technology, but a sanctuary for the soul, where a community came to simply be together. A deep, aching longing bloomed within Elara's chest, a desire to sink onto one of those benches and let this perfect serenity wash over her forever. She could stay, listening to the ghostly conversations, a permanent guest in a timeless moment, but the weight of the pearlescent compass in her satchel was a potent anchor to the present. Her village, her friends, the world above needed to hear this story. They needed to know that a civilization's greatest treasure could be its capacity for quiet reflection and shared joy. Her purpose was not to hide, but to translate. Kneeling by a cluster of plants with leaves that pulsed like a soft heartbeat, she carefully plucked a few of their tiny, luminous seeds, placing them in the empty locket she wore around her neck. She would plant these in the village square, a living, growing memorial to the spirit she had found. As the last seed settled into its metal chamber, the garden's radiant light dimmed perceptibly, the colors of the flowers fading just a shade. The air grew still, the echoes of laughter softening to a whisper. It was a quiet, powerful reminder that to take from the past was to incur a sacred debt. These seeds were not a trophy, they were a responsibility, and their survival in her world would be the first installment of her repayment. A gentle, warm breeze she had not felt before rustled through the glowing leaves, carrying the mingled scents of ocean salt and night-blooming blossoms. It curled around her, a comforting presence, and then flowed toward a narrow passage she had not noticed, one that sloped gently upward. The way was lit not by crystals, but by the faint, hopeful glimmer of daylight filtering down from somewhere far above, calling her home. A familiar salt breeze met her as she stepped from the stone passage into the cove, the ordinary sounds of gulls and waves, a stark contrast to the silent world she had just left. The villagers rushed forward, their faces etched with a day's worth of worry, their relief palpable as they saw she was whole. Without a word, Elara opened the locket, revealing the tiny, glowing seeds nestled within. She told them of the garden grown from memory, a place not of power, but of peace, where the true treasure was the echo of shared community. Her words painted a picture so vivid, so heartfelt, that the fear in their eyes softened into wonder. Inspired, they decided then and there to plant the seeds in a sheltered grove near the village, a place they would dedicate as a sanctuary for quiet thought and the sharing of tales. Yet, as they cleared the space, Old doubts resurfaced in whispers. What if outsiders came seeking the source of the strange light? What if this new magic made their own traditions feel small and insignificant? The familiar was a comfortable blanket, and some were afraid to cast it off. Hearing these concerns, Elara made a decision that would define the garden's soul. "This will not be my garden, or a monument to a lost king," she announced. "It will be ours." She invited everyone to bring a plant from their own family plot, a stone from a meaningful place, or a story to share when the circle was complete. This would be a tapestry woven from all their lives, ensuring its roots were deep in their shared soil. The very next morning, a collective gasp went through the village. Overnight, the seeds had sprouted, sending up shoots that shimmered with a soft, ethereal light, their leaves pulsing gently like tiny, verdant hearts. This undeniable magic erased the last vestiges of skepticism, cementing their belief in the legacy they now nurtured. And as the plants grew, they began to emit a faint, harmonic hum, a sound that wove itself into the very fabric of their daily lives, blending with the crash of waves and the chatter of the market, creating a new, deeper layer of ambient peace over the cove. The garden's gentle hum now wove through the very air of the village, a constant, soothing presence. Elara and Lyra felt a new pull, an instinct to deepen the connection. They carefully gathered a few leaves from the pulsing plants, their light undimmed by the harvest, and returned to the loom. As Lyra's skilled fingers wove these luminous threads into the existing tapestry, something extraordinary happened. The moment the first new thread was integrated, the entire fabric shimmered, and the air filled with the scent of salt and blooming night flowers. The static patterns began to ripple and flow, transforming into moving images of water and light. Villagers gathering for their evening stories gasped as they saw scenes from Atlantis unfold before them, children laughing as they learned geometry from shifting sand, families sharing meals on sun-drenched terraces overlooking the sea. The tapestry had become a living chronicle, its images shifting in response to the emotions and questions of those who watched. A shared awe settled over the community, strengthening their bond with this history that now felt intimately their own. This newfound treasure, however, did not remain a secret for long. A traveler from a distant port, drawn by whispers of a village touched by magic, arrived one day. He was a man of refined taste and obvious wealth, his clothes fine and his words smoother than sea glass. He stood before the tapestry for a long time, his eyes calculating as he watched the watery scenes of daily Atlantean life drift across its surface. He approached the village elders with a staggering offer, a sum of gold that could build new boats, repair every roof, and secure their comfort for a generation. All he asked for in return was the tapestry. The temptation was a physical weight in the air, a silent siren call of security and ease that tested the very values the tapestry represented. It was a choice between a shared, spiritual heritage and a tangible, individual reward. The decision was not made by the elders alone. The entire village gathered, and the discussion was quiet and solemn. Old Man Hemlock, who had once feared these old stories, was the first to speak. "That cloth is not a thing to be sold," he said, his voice firm. "It is the heart of our new story. It remembers with us." One by one, others echoed his sentiment. The young mother who had recognized the lullaby, the fisherman who remembered his grandfather's tales. They all understood that the gold, however tempting, was a fleeting comfort. The tapestry was a living part of their community now, a source of identity and wonder that no amount of wealth could replace. Their unanimous decision was a powerful declaration of their values. They would keep their communal treasure. The wealthy traveler accepted their refusal with a polite, unreadable nod and departed the next morning. His respectful exit was a relief, but his visit left a lingering unease, a chill that the garden's warm light could not entirely dispel. It was a stark reminder that their peaceful mission to honor the past existed in a world with different priorities, and that such a unique wonder could attract not just the curious, but the covetous. That evening, as a soft mist rolled in from the sea, the villagers found a measure of comfort. The tapestry, glowing with an especially brilliant and steady light, projected a new image across the gathering space, a vast, serene ocean under a canopy of unfamiliar, brilliant stars. The scene was one of profound peace and infinite depth, a silent message that felt less like a memory and more like a promise. They were not alone in their vigil, and the very forces that had guided Elara were still watching over them, their protection as deep and quiet as the sea itself. That night, under the brilliant canopy of unfamiliar stars, the tapestry had shown them. Elara led the villagers to the water's edge. They did not build fires or sing loud songs. Instead, they sat in a quiet circle on the cool sand, sharing simple wishes for their children and old memories of their grandparents, their voices mingling with the sigh of the waves and the gentle hum from the garden plants they had brought with them. As their stories wove together in the darkness, something magical began to happen out at sea. The waves themselves started to glow with a soft, blue bioluminescence, but this was no random shimmer. The light swirled and pulsed, arranging itself into distinct patterns that perfectly mirrored the constellations shining overhead. It was a breathtaking dance of unity, the ocean echoing the sky in a silent, luminous conversation. In that moment of perfect harmony, Elara felt a sharp, piercing fear cut through the wonder. They had come so close to selling this magic, to locking away these stories forever. The thought was a cold weight in her stomach. What if, in a generation or two, her own great-grandchildren saw the glowing garden as a mere oddity, and the tapestry as just an old, curious rug? What if the profound lesson of balance was forgotten, and the deep connection between land, sea, and sky faded back into mere legend? The fragility of their hard-won knowledge felt terrifying. This wisdom needed a stronger anchor than memory alone. As the villagers watched the celestial display, lost in awe, Elara slipped away to her cottage. She lit a single candle, opened a new, blank journal, and began to write. She would create a guide, not a dry history book, but a woven tapestry of words. It would hold the epic tales of the crystalline city, alongside the simple ritual of listening to a conch shell, the wisdom of the tide callers next to instructions for planting the harmonic seeds. It would be a manual for remembering, a way to keep the spirit of Atlantis alive in their daily lives. The words did not feel like her own as they flowed onto the page. They came with an otherworldly ease, as if she were merely a conduit for a story that was eager to be told. The ink itself seemed to hold a faint silver sheen, and as she filled page after page, she realized the book was becoming something more. It was being infused with the same living energy that pulsed in the garden and animated the tapestry. This was not a record of the past. It was a bridge to it, a living document meant to breathe with each new reader. She wrote through the night, and as the first hints of dawn painted the horizon in hues of rose and gold, she penned the final sentence. The completed guide lay before her, its pages emitting a soft, comforting glow, a gentle light that promised guidance and remembrance. Elara closed the cover, her hand resting on the warm leather. She knew, with a certainty that settled her earlier fears, that it was time to share this new heart of their community. The completed guide felt warm and alive in Elara's hands as she stood before the entire village at their first formal ceremony of remembrance. She did not speak of kings or cataclysms. Instead, she opened the book and read aloud its gentle directives, her voice blending with the harmonic hum of the plants encircling them. The passages spoke of listening to the rain as if it were a story, of seeing the patience of a growing seed as a form of wisdom, and of understanding that every person's joy and sorrow is part of a larger, shared song. As her words settled over the crowd, a palpable quiet descended, not of emptiness, but of deep feeling. You could see the shift in small, daily acts. The fishermen began to pause for a moment of gratitude before casting their nets. Parents started teaching their children the old lullabies that harmonize with the garden's hum. The village, once bustling with straightforward purpose, now carried an undercurrent of quiet reflection, a collective breath held in reverence for the world around them. Yet for some, this new rhythm felt alien and unsettling. Old Man Hemlock, though he valued the stories, found the constant mindfulness exhausting. A young carpenter named Kale struggled to see how silent contemplation helped him shape wood. They came to Elara not with anger, but with a sincere confusion, worried they were failing at a test they did not fully understand. Seeing their unease, Elara knew that wisdom forced was not wisdom at all. She began organizing small, informal circles in the glowing grove, where anyone could voice their doubts without judgment. These were not lessons, but shared conversations where a farmer might explain how listening to the soil had improved his yield, or a weaver could demonstrate how a quiet mind led to more intricate patterns. It was during one of these gentle circles that the guide revealed its true, living nature. Kale was expressing his frustration, saying his hands felt clumsy and his mind loud when he tried to work with the new awareness. As he spoke, Elara, who held the open guide, watched as the text on the page subtly shimmered and rearranged itself. The words now spoke directly of the meditation found in craft, of how the rhythm of a hammer or the glide of a plane could become a mantra that quieted the inner noise. A stunned silence fell over the group. The book was not a static relic. It was a responsive companion, its wisdom shaped by the very hearts it sought to guide. This mystery deepened on another evening as the circle discussed their connection to the vast world beyond their island. Elara held the guide on her lap, and as the conversation turned to the stars above, the pages once again went blank. Then, as they watched, a map began to draw itself in lines of soft, silver light. It was not a chart of oceans or lands, but a perfect, detailed map of the night sky, depicting constellations no one recognized, their patterns aligned in a way that felt both ancient and profoundly significant. The final, glowing dot settled into place directly over the heart of their own village, suggesting that the legacy of Atlantis was not just buried in the deep or rooted in the land, but was also written in the heavens themselves, waiting to be read. The star map in the guide was a riddle written in light. Night after night, Elara and the villagers gathered in the grove, their faces turned upward, comparing the glowing page to the vast expanse above. They soon realized the unfamiliar constellations were not random, but formed specific patterns the Atlanteans had revered as celestial guides. These stars were their navigational charts for ocean voyages, and their sacred clock for planting and harvest, a way of weaving their lives into the fabric of the cosmos itself. This discovery sparked a new ritual. Each month, on the night a key constellation reached its zenith, the community would hold a silent stargazing vigil. They would align their meditations with these ancient markers, and in the quiet, a profound feeling would settle over them, a sense that their small island was a single note in a grand, universal harmony. But nature, in its wisdom, did not always cooperate. Thick cloud cover would sometimes shroud the sky on these appointed nights, leaving the villagers standing in disappointed darkness. At first, this felt like a failure, a broken connection. Yet, through gentle discussion, they came to understand that the clouds were not an obstacle, but a lesson. The path to wisdom was not a straight line, but a dance with unpredictability, teaching them patience and a deeper appreciation for the clear nights that followed. To give this new rhythm a more tangible form, Elara decided to create a simple calendar for the village. Using the guide's celestial map, she marked dates for communal storytelling, for the first planting of the harmonic seeds, and for quiet reflection, all aligned with the Atlantean cycles. It was a way of syncing their modern lives with an ancient, cosmic pulse. On the very first night, this new calendar was put into use. Something extraordinary happened. The stars themselves seemed to respond. They shone with an impossible intensity, feeling not distant and cold, but close and warm, as if the velvet of the sky had thinned. Several villagers swore they could hear it then, a soft, melodic chiming carried on the night breeze, a celestial music that harmonized perfectly with the hum from their garden. And as if in direct answer to this cosmic chorus, the harmonic plants in their sanctuary began to bloom. Their new flowers were perfect, star-shaped blossoms that glowed with a soft, silvery light, each tiny petal pulsing in a gentle, rhythmic time with the twinkling of the stars far above. The star-shaped blossoms released their magic with the next full moon. A gentle, sparkling pollen drifted from the flowers, filling the evening air with the crisp scent of a deep ocean breeze and a faint, melodic chime that seemed to come from everywhere at once. During village gatherings, this multisensory shower had a profound effect. Worries seemed to lift from shoulders, replaced by a quiet, pervasive calm. Inspired by the serene atmosphere, the village children began to create in ways they never had before. They painted swirling patterns on smooth stones, wove tales of glowing sea creatures, and composed simple songs that harmonized with the pollen's distant music, their creativity blooming alongside the magical plants. This newfound peace was fragile, and the test came with a sudden, unseasonal cold snap. A biting frost was forecast to descend from the mountains, a clear threat to the delicate, luminous blossoms. The entire village understood the stakes immediately. Protecting the garden was no longer about preserving a curiosity. It was a direct test of their commitment to the legacy they had sworn to uphold. Would they stand by and watch this symbol of harmony wither in the cold, or would they fight for it? Guided by Elara, they decided to act. They worked through the day, building delicate, transparent shelters over the grove. They used traditional methods, crafting frames from willow branches, but they also consulted the living guide, which offered insights on angles and placements that would best capture the faint warmth of the sun and deflect the worst of the chill. It was a perfect fusion of their inherited knowledge and the wisdom of the past. When the frost came, it coated the island in a thin, silver veil. Inside their makeshift shelters, huddled together with warm stones and hopeful hearts, the villagers waited for dawn. As the sun rose, it revealed their success. The Starfall blossoms had survived, their petals shimmering with a renewed, almost defiant intensity. In the nights that followed, the pollen they released was different. It still carried the ocean scent and the faraway music, but now, within each sparkling mote, tiny, fleeting images could be seen. There were glimpses of intricate crystal instruments, of dancers moving with impossible grace, of architects drawing plans in light upon the water. The pollen now carried visual echoes of Atlantis's greatest artistic and scientific achievements, a gift of living memory. During one such pollen fall, a young girl sat drawing in the soft earth with a stick. As the sparkling dust settled around her, she looked at her own simple lines, then up at the shimmering air. Her hand moved again, and she carefully sketched a spiraling pattern, a design of perfect symmetry and ancient origin. It was the same symbol carved into the submerged archway where Elara's journey began. The girl then looked up, not at Elara or her parents, but out past the harbor, toward the endless expanse of the sea. She pointed with a quiet, knowing smile, as if greeting an old friend waiting just beyond the horizon. Kai's small hand slipped into Elara's, his grip certain and calm. Without a word, he led her and a handful of villagers down the winding path to the beach, his gaze fixed on the horizon. There, where the waves kissed the sand, he knelt and with a single, deliberate finger, began to trace the spiraling symbol from the archway. The final curve of the pattern met the incoming tide just as a gentle wave washed over it. Instead of erasing the lines, the water made them burn with a soft, blue light, the symbol glowing defiantly beneath the surface. As the water receded, it revealed what had been hidden for ages, a flat, circular stone, perfectly fitted into the seabed and covered in the same intricate design. A collective breath caught in the group as Elara stepped forward and with a trembling hand pressed her palm to the stone's center. It sank with a soft, satisfying click, and from the deep, a single, resonant chime echoed, a note so pure it seemed to vibrate in their very bones. The sound hung in the air, beautiful and unsettling. Immediately, the debate began. What if this was a lock, not a key, and they had just opened a door they could not close? An older fisherman voiced the fear of many, worrying that tampering with the stone might shift the sands and alter the currents that had protected their harbor for generations. Another spoke of the delicate coral and the nests of the seabirds, concerned they might be disrupting a balance they did not fully understand. The stone's power was undeniable, but its purpose remained a mystery, and the risk of causing irreversible harm felt terribly real. They stood at the water's edge, divided between wonder and caution, the fate of their home resting on a single, collective choice. Elara saw the conflict in their faces and knew a decision made in fear would bear no good fruit. She asked them to join her, right there on the damp sand, for a moment of shared silence, to listen not with their ears, but with their hearts for guidance. As they meditated, the harmonic hum from the village garden seemed to flow down to the shore, weaving with the rhythm of the sea. A deep, communal calm settled over them, and when they opened their eyes, the choice was clear. They would trust the path the symbols had laid before them. They would proceed, but with the reverence of a guest, not the force of a conqueror. With renewed resolve, they pressed the stone once more. The chime rang out again, clearer and more complex this time, a chord that seemed to call across the waves. In answer, a pod of dolphins surged into the cove, their sleek bodies arcing through the water in a synchronized, spiraling dance that mirrored the symbol on the stone. They circled the villagers, clicks and whistles, weaving into the fading chime, their intelligent eyes seeming to offer not just approval, but a joyful welcome. The tension shattered into relieved laughter and tears. The ocean's own guardians had blessed their choice. Then, as one, the dolphins turned. They leaped from the water in a graceful, powerful arc, their bodies pointing like arrows toward the open sea before diving back into the depths. The villagers watched mesmerized as a new, gentle current began to flow, pulling at their ankles and guiding their gaze to the same distant point on the horizon. The water itself was now showing them the way, a liquid path unfurling under the sun. The current flowed like a silken ribbon, guiding their small boats away from the familiar shore. The dolphins swam alongside, their sleek forms cutting through the water with a purpose that felt like an escort, not just a spectacle. They traveled for what felt like both an instant and an eternity, until the horizon shimmered and a new shape resolved itself from the sea mist. It was not an island of rock or sand, but a floating sanctuary woven entirely from living seagrass, its surface dotted with aquatic flowers that bloomed in soft, pulsating colors. The air around it hummed with a profound, living silence. Stepping onto its springy surface was like stepping onto the back of a gentle, sleeping giant. Every plank of woven grass, every glowing petal, felt sentient and fragile. One misplaced step could tear the delicate tapestry, and a shared, unspoken understanding passed between the villagers. Their excitement was immediately tempered by a deep, reverent caution. This was not a treasure trove to be plundered, but a sacred library whose very floor was alive. Elara knelt, her fingers hovering just above a tablet of smoothed mother of pearl, etched with flowing script. "We cannot take these," she whispered, her voice barely disturbing the quiet. To remove them would be like tearing a page from a living heart. We must become its scribes, and so they did. They settled onto the resilient grass, pulling out charcoals and journals, their movements slow and deliberate. They sketched the intricate carvings that detailed philosophies of communal responsibility and ecological balance, their hands translating ancient wisdom onto modern pages. As they worked, a subtle motion began. The entire island drifted, turning slowly as if on a silent, deep ocean current. The realization struck them all at once. This sanctuary was never meant to be found and held. It was a guardian that moved to protect its knowledge, and their window to learn from it was already closing. Just as a low, melodic tone signaled a more decisive shift in the island's drift, the seagrass at the center parted. A basket, woven from the same luminous fibers as the island itself, rose gracefully from the heart of the sanctuary. Within it lay a cluster of pearls, each one glowing with a soft, internal light, their surfaces swirling with captured scenes of Atlantean life. It was a gift, a condensed archive of memories offered in trust for the work they had already begun. The luminescent pearls felt cool and impossibly smooth in Elara's palms. As the floating sanctuary drifted away into the mist, she carefully distributed them among the villagers. The moment a pearl was held with focused intent, it blossomed with light, casting a three-dimensional scene into the air around them. A musician plucked strings of solidified water, creating chords that seemed to physically cleanse the spirit. Dancers moved with a grace that defied gravity, their forms flowing like the tide itself. Architects were shown not commanding stone, but singing to it, encouraging crystals to grow into structures that pulsed with soft, internal light. Every projection was a masterpiece of artistry and communal joy, a civilization that had turned daily life into a form of worship. The villagers stood in rapt silence, tears glistening on many faces, as the past unfolded around them with a clarity that felt more real than memory. They knew immediately that these pearls were the key to making the ancient world breathe again. During the very next storytelling circle, they decided to use one. The projection of a bustling, sun-drenched Atlantean marketplace, filled with the laughter of children and the scent of exotic blooms, materialized in the center of the grove. For the first time, the villagers did not just hear about Atlantis. They stood within it, the sounds and sights washing over them, erasing the centuries in a single, breathtaking moment. The awe, however, was quickly tempered by a quiet worry. As the scene faded, a keen-eyed child noticed it first. The pearl they had used no longer glowed with its original fierce intensity. Its light was softer, its inner swirls moving just a little more sluggishly. The energy within each pearl was finite, a precious resource that could be spent. A solemn discussion followed. To use the pearls carelessly would be to extinguish these final echoes forever. The community agreed on a sacred rule. The pearls would only be activated during the most significant gatherings, the solstices, and the festivals of remembrance. And they devised a method of conservation. After each use, the pearls would be returned to the heart of the Harmonic garden, nestled among the Starfall blossoms under the open sky. They hoped the combined energy of the plants and the starlight would gently replenish them. The first time they tried it, the entire village held its breath through the night. At dawn, a collective sigh of relief turned into a gasp of wonder. Not only had the pearl's light been restored, but it shone with a new, deeper radiance. During the next projection, the change was immediately apparent. The scene was of an Atlantean artist, painting with light upon a wall of flowing water. As the villagers watched, filled with their own sense of creative inspiration, the artist's colors began to shift, the patterns evolving in direct response to the collective wonder and joy emanating from the audience. A gentle nudge of curiosity from an old fisherman made the scene focus on the intricate details of a crystalline fishing vessel. The pearls were no longer just projectors. They had become interactive, their stories now a conversation between the past and the present, shaped by the emotional resonance of the viewers. One evening, as the community gathered, the pearls' projection shifted into a grand, sweeping celebration. It was the Festival of Unity, a time when the accompanying emotional echo conveyed every individual's unique talent was offered as a gift to the whole. Musicians, builders, gardeners, and cooks all contributed to a single, day-long symphony of shared existence. Watching the Atlanteans move in such effortless harmony, a powerful idea sparked in Elara's mind. They could do this. Their village could create its own festival of unity, a living bridge where the wisdom of the past could be practiced in the present, weaving their own lives into the enduring tapestry. The idea for the Festival of Unity was a seed that took root in every heart. Elara and the villagers worked for weeks, weaving Atlantean spirals into their traditional floral garlands and teaching the children the harmonic melodies that echoed from the pearls. They planned a great feast where dishes from their own history would sit beside recreated Atlantean delicacies described in the Living Guide. The entire village square was transformed, with Lyra's tapestry as the central altar and the Harmonic garden's starfall blossoms arranged in intricate patterns on the ground. On the morning of the festival, a soft, expectant energy hung in the air, and it only grew as boats from neighboring communities began to arrive, drawn by whispers of a village touched by an ancient magic. They came bearing their own gifts. A clan of mountain weavers brought vibrant wool dyed with rare minerals, and coastal fishermen from the north shared complex rhythmic chants used to call the tide. The gathering swiftly became a living tapestry of its own, a beautiful fusion of cultures that celebrated diversity while singing a common song of community and respect for the earth. For a moment, the harmony was perfect. Then, a brief tension flickered. An elder from the mountain clan, a woman with eyes the color of granite, pointed to a central Atlantean symbol woven into the feast day bread, a spiral within a circle. In her tradition, she explained with quiet firmness, such a symbol represented a boundary, a warning to keep outsiders beyond the family line. To the villagers, it signified the infinite connection of all life. The air grew still, the beautiful fusion seeming suddenly fragile. Seeing the misunderstanding, Elara did not lecture or correct. Instead, she gently invited everyone to form a great circle in the center of the square. She asked a simple, profound question, letting the conch shell pass from hand to hand. What does true unity feel like in your heart? The answers were as varied as the people. The mountain elder spoke of unity as the strength of the peak, unyielding and proud. A northern fisherman described it as the net, where every knot must hold for all to be secure. A village child simply said it was the feeling of everyone holding hands during a storm. As they listened to one another, the initial friction melted into a deeper, more textured understanding. They were not saying the same thing, but they were yearning for the same feeling of wholeness. In that moment of shared vulnerability, something miraculous occurred. The harmonic plants in the garden began to pulse in a slow, deep rhythm. The pearls, resting on their velvet cloth, glowed with a warm, golden light. And Lyra's tapestry, hanging above them all, shimmered as its woven scenes of Atlantean life seemed to flow directly into the faces of the people gathered below. Then a soft, golden light descended, enveloping the entire festival in a palpable embrace. It was not a light you saw with your eyes alone, but one you felt with your soul, a warmth that settled deep in the chest, a resonant peace that everyone later described with the same two words. It felt like coming home. The light did not fade with the last song or the final story. It lingered over the village for days, a gentle aurora that softened the edges of the world. In its wake, the villagers discovered that their bonds with each other felt less like fragile threads and more like resilient, living roots. Their connection to the land and sea was no longer a concept, but a constant, quiet conversation. They had not just remembered a lost civilization, they had become its living echo, and the path forward was illuminated by a light that refused to be extinguished. The golden light did not fade with the festival's end. It settled over the village like a permanent, gentle dawn, softening the shadows and infusing the air with a sense of profound calm. In its glow, daily life was transformed. Fishermen found their hands steadier, their knots stronger. Gardeners noticed their plants grew with more vibrant colors and richer scents. Parents hummed the old lullabies, and their children slept more deeply, their dreams filled with peaceful, flowing shapes. This was not a magic to be wielded, but a presence to be lived within, a subtle enhancement of well-being and creativity that invited mindful practice into every action. Word of this tranquil haven spread across the islands, carried by the returning visitors. Soon, their small harbor welcomed a new kind of traveler, not the curious or the covetous, but the weary. People arrived with tired eyes and heavy hearts, seeking solace from grief or inspiration for a stalled creative project. The villagers greeted them not as tourists, but as guests, sharing their knowledge freely. They taught the simple ritual of listening to the conch shell, offered quiet space in the harmonic garden, and wove the visitors' own stories into their evening circles, enriching the tapestry of their community. Yet, Elara watched this growing fame with a quiet unease. She saw how a merchant's eyes lingered on the glowing Starfall blossoms, already calculating their market value. She heard visitors speak of the village as a destination, a place to consume and experience. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach. What if their sacred traditions became a commodity, their quiet wisdom packaged and sold until its soul was hollowed out? The very light that blessed them could become a beacon for the very forces of distraction and greed that had always threatened deeper truths. She brought her concerns to the village, and a solemn discussion unfolded under the eternal twilight of their golden sky. They knew they could not and should not turn people away, but they could define the terms of the exchange. Together, they decided to create a council of stewardship, formed not of leaders, but of guardians. It included their most gifted storyteller, their most patient gardener, and their wisest elders, including old Hemlock, whose initial caution had matured into fierce protectiveness. This council's sole purpose was to steward the artifacts and practices, ensuring the legacy was passed down with its core values of balance and reverence intact. The council's first official act was a declaration that resonated with the power of a vow. They designated the entire village and its surrounding forests, shores, and the hidden cove as a sanctuary of memory. This was not a law written on parchment, but a promise etched into their collective spirit. It was a protected zone where the quiet wisdom of nature and the echoes of history were revered above profit, above convenience, above all else. On the day of the sanctuary's dedication, the entire community gathered at the water's edge. As Elara spoke the final words of their pledge, a familiar presence stirred in the cove. The tide collar rose from the waves, its form a shimmering pillar of water and light. It did not speak, but turned its serene gaze upon them, and in that look, they felt a profound and final judgment. It was a gaze of deep, abiding approval. Then, with a grace that brought tears to every eye, the being dissolved, its essence merging back into the vastness of the ocean from which it came. It was not a farewell, but a release. The guardianship was now fully, completely theirs. A deep and quiet sense of completion settled over them. A circle finally closed, and a new, eternal vigil begun. The ocean held its breath as the tide collar faded into its depths, leaving behind a silence that was not empty, but full. That evening, Elara led the villagers to the shore not for a grand celebration, but for a quiet ceremony of gratitude. They did not bring speeches or offerings, only their silent thanks, whispered on the salt breeze and carried out over the water. The ocean's response was immediate and gentle. The waves, usually a constant percussion against the sand, softened to a mere whisper. The water became so clear they could see straight to the sandy bottom, where schools of silver fish moved like synchronized thoughts. And there, in the deep blue, villagers began to notice soft, luminous shapes, gliding effortlessly graceful, non-human forms that pulsed with a familiar, gentle light. They were not threats, but watchers, ancient guardians now content to observe from a respectful distance, their presence a silent promise of protection. A bittersweet ache bloomed in Elara's chest as she watched them. She missed the thrilling terror of the stone archway, the profound stillness of the tide caller's judgment, the direct and wondrous conversations with the past. That part of her quest was over. Her purpose had shifted from discovery to stewardship, a quieter, more patient calling, rooted not in hidden caves, but in the daily life of her community. The real magic was no longer something to be found, but something to be nurtured. Embracing this new role, she began to gather the children, with Kai always at the forefront, in the Harmonic garden. She taught them how to listen to the stories hidden in the rain and the wind, how to trace the spirals of history in the patterns of a seashell, and how the simple act of quiet breathing could open a door to deeper understanding. She was not giving them rules to follow, but a language to speak, a way of seeing the world through Atlantean eyes. The children, with their unburdened hearts and innate creativity, did not just learn these ways, they began to reinvent them. They composed new songs that blended the old hums with their own playful melodies. They built tiny, intricate models of the floating sanctuary from driftwood and woven grass. The legacy was not being copied, it was being woven into the fabric of their own young lives, ensuring it would grow and adapt while its core truth remained untouched. One evening, as the golden light began to deepen into twilight, Kai approached Elara with a piece of bark paper. He presented it to her with a solemn pride. It was a drawing, a map unlike any she had ever seen. At its center was their village, rendered in careful detail. From it, lines spiraled outward, connecting to the constellations above and the luminous paths of the ocean currents below. It was not a guide to a single location, but a portrait of their unified existence, a perfect illustration of the interconnected world they were now committed to protecting. Kai's map found its home on the largest wall of the village hall, and it refused to be a static thing. The children, guided by Elara, wove new elements into it with each passing moon. In spring, they pressed budding leaves along the drawn forest paths. During the autumn harvest, they glued tiny seeds to the fields. The map became a living chronicle of their world, its textures and colors shifting with the seasons and the community's own joys and struggles. It was impossible to look at it without seeing your own life reflected there, a single thread in a vast, beautiful tapestry. This visual proof of their interconnectedness sparked a new ambition. If their actions here resonated so deeply, could those ripples extend further? Inspired, the villagers began projects to share their sustainable practices, teaching neighboring settlements how to channel spring water into terraced gardens and how to listen for the health of the soil. This newfound purpose was soon tested by nature itself. A season of fierce storms descended upon the coast, with winds that shrieked like forgotten gods and waves that clawed at the shoreline. Yet, where other communities might have fractured in panic, the village held with a profound, shared calm. They moved with a practiced harmony, securing boats and reinforcing homes, their actions guided by the deep, intuitive balance they had cultivated. The harmonic plants in their garden pulsed with a steady, reassuring light, and the living guide remained open in the hall, its pages offering quiet wisdom on resilience and flow. They felt the fear, of course, but it did not rule them. It was met and gentled by the strength of their bonds. When the worst of the storms passed, their own safety secured, their first thought was for others. They consulted the unified map, noting which coastal villages lay in the path of the tempest. Using the guide's principles of communal support, they organized relief efforts, gathering surplus food, medicines, and teams of hands to help rebuild. They arrived not as saviors, but as neighbors, sharing not just resources, but also their practices of quiet reflection to help soothe traumatized spirits. This was the legacy of Atlantis in action, not as a historical artifact, but as a living code of empathy and balance. Their consistent compassion sent roots deep into the region. A network of like-minded villages began to form, connected by a shared commitment to stewardship. Fishermen from the north agreed to new moon fishing bans to protect spawning grounds, a direct result of the villagers' teachings. Mountain clans shared ancient seed varieties, enriching everyone's harvests. This collective will began to exert a gentle but undeniable influence, its energy softening even regional policies. Councils once focused solely on trade began to discuss cultural preservation and ecological corridors, the language of balance slowly entering the halls of governance. After the final storm of the season moved out to sea, a magnificent double rainbow arced across the sky, its colors brilliant against the retreating gray clouds. As the villagers watched in awe, a soft gasp drew their attention back to the map in the hall. The painted ocean currents and land paths were glowing with a new, silvery light, and fresh, luminous lines were etching themselves across the surface. These were not trails to be walked, but routes of connection, linking their village to the newly allied settlements and beyond, showing that their circle of harmony was still expanding, its light reaching further than any of them had dared to dream. These luminous lines on the map were not just ink, but invitations. Elara packed her satchel with copies of the Living Guide and a precious pouch of harmonic seeds, her journey no longer one of discovery, but of sharing. She traveled from village to village, not as a prophet, but as a fellow gardener, showing them how to listen for the subtle song in their own soil and water. In mountain settlements, they planted the seeds near ancient, snow-fed springs. In bustling coastal towns, sanctuaries bloomed in quiet public squares. Each new garden became a node in a growing network, a place where the old stories could take root and flourish in a new home. The shared dream was beautiful, but the practicalities were a tangle of human complexity. Organizing the first collective festival of lights across dozens of communities was a lesson in patience. Messengers raced between villages with conflicting suggestions for the meditation's timing. Some argued for midnight, others for dawn. A debate arose over the specific focus of their shared intention. Should it be for peace among people, or for the healing of the oceans? Elara, who had once single-handedly decoded an ancient civilization, now had to learn the delicate art of stepping back. She realized her greatest act of leadership would be to make herself unnecessary. She began to quietly mentor others, encouraging a young weaver from the northern clans to take charge of the ceremony's symbols, and a soft-spoken farmer to coordinate the timing based on celestial cycles. She became a guide in the shadows, ensuring the movement belonged to everyone and could therefore outlive any single person. When the appointed hour finally arrived, the result was beyond any individual expectation. Across the region, in groves and on shores and in town squares, thousands of people fell into a simultaneous, silent meditation. The collective focus created something tangible, a wave of serene energy that washed over the land. Participants later spoke of a shared sensation, a profound and gentle calm that seemed to still the very wind. Curiously, scientific instruments in the area later recorded a brief, unexplained spike in positive atmospheric ions, a measurable echo of the peaceful intention sent forth into the world. After the festival, Elara returned home to her village, her role now comfortably that of an elder storyteller. She found her community transformed, not by grand new monuments, but by a deeper, more vibrant interconnectedness. The harbor was filled with unfamiliar boats, bearing friendly faces. The market buzzed with new dialects and shared laughter, and the children's maps now included distant lands as familiar places. The legacy was no longer a secret to be protected, but a living, breathing world they were building together, one shared story at a time. The final volume was her life's work, a tapestry of ink and memory. Elara spent her later years filling its pages with everything she had learned, weaving the epic tales of the crystalline city with the simple instructions for listening to a conch shell. She illustrated the book herself, her drawings capturing the luminous flow of the tide caller and the intricate patterns of the Starfall blossoms, creating a guide that was as much a piece of art as it was a record. When she finally laid down her pen, she knew this was her ultimate offering, a vessel designed to carry the soul of Atlantis safely into the future. The volume was immediately cherished, its stories sparking new life as the village children adapted them into plays performed in the town square, and local musicians composed soaring melodies based on the harmonic frequencies she had transcribed. The legacy was no longer a static thing to be protected, but a living current of creativity, constantly remade by each new generation. Yet, in her most quiet moments, a flicker of doubt would surface. Could words on a page, no matter how beautiful, ever truly contain the feeling of standing before the heart-shaped crystal, or the profound peace of the memory garden? She worried that the essence, the raw, living truth of the experience, might be lost in the translation, but then she would watch a young gardener patiently tending the harmonic plants, or hear a fisherman explain the balance of the tides to his son, and her heart would settle. The true spirit of Atlantis was not in the book, but in the actions it inspired. With a quiet heart, she made her final symbolic gesture. She carefully placed her original, sea-stained journal and the pearlescent compass into the village archive, entrusting them to the community as a whole. This was not a loss, but a completion. The quest was no longer her solitary burden. It was now the shared inheritance of every person who called the village home. The archive, with these sacred artifacts at its center, transformed into a quiet pilgrimage site. Seekers from across the network of allied villages would journey to sit in its hushed space, hoping to connect with the ancient wisdom. And sometimes, for those who approached with a heart full of genuine wonder and selfless intent, a soft glow would emanate from the compass, or the pages of the journal would emit a faint, melodic hum, a silent affirmation that the past was still listening. On a tranquil afternoon, Elara sat alone in the Harmonic garden, the sun warm on her shoulders. She closed her eyes, listening to the gentle pulse of the plants and the distant, rhythmic sigh of the sea. In that deep quiet, she did not feel alone. She felt the presence of Lyra at her loom, of old Nereus on his cliff, of Kai with his maps, and of all the countless faces, past and present, who had shared in this beautiful, unending story. A proposal for a deep-water shipping lane arrived like a winter squall, its charts and figures promising economic prosperity in exchange for the dredging of their sacred coastline. The very waters that whispered with ancient songs were to be carved and channeled for massive freighters, a move that would silence the dolphins and smother the delicate coral archways in silt. For the first time in many years, a cold fear gripped the village, the kind that threatened to shatter their hard-won harmony. This was not a storm they could wait out, but a conscious choice placed before them, a direct test of every value the Atlantis legacy had taught them. They could not simply oppose, they had to offer a vision more compelling than profit. The entire network of allied villages was alerted, and the living guide was consulted not for ancient wisdom, but for strategies of peaceful persuasion. The children, with Kai's steady hand now guiding them, updated the great map in the hall, painting the proposed industrial zone in stark, warning colors, while illuminating the vast web of life it would disrupt. They gathered every tool they had honed over a lifetime. Lyra and her apprentices worked day and night, weaving a new panel for the great tapestry that depicted the proposed future, a gray, silent sea where the luminous paths were extinguished. The harmonic plants were brought to the village square, their soft pulsing a constant reminder of what they fought to protect. And the pearls, those precious vessels of memory, were prepared to show the commissioners not just what was, but what could be lost forever. The day of the public hearing arrived, held in the largest coastal town. The atmosphere was tense, thick with the language of commerce and progress. The project leaders presented their case with cool efficiency, their blueprints and economic forecasts feeling alien and soulless in the room. Then it was the community's turn. Elara, her hair now silver but her eyes holding the same deep light, stepped forward. She did not speak of anger or obstruction. Her voice was a calm tide, weaving a story of a different kind of wealth. She spoke of the fisherman whose family had known these currents for 10 generations, of the child who learned compassion by watching a sea turtle nest, of the quiet hum that healed weary hearts. This was the real economy, she explained, the economy of spirit and sustenance that could not be quantified on a balance sheet. As she spoke, the villagers activated the pearls. the room filled with the sights and sounds of Atlantis's vibrant harbors, not as a lost fantasy, but as a testament to what a civilization in balance with the sea could achieve. The great tapestry was unveiled, its new panel a silent, heartbreaking elegy, and at that very moment, as if the land itself was adding its voice, the harmonic plants gathered in the square began to pulse in a deep, resonant rhythm, a wave of palpable serenity that washed over the entire assembly. The lead commissioner, a pragmatic woman who had heard countless emotional appeals, found herself unable to look away from the pearl's projection of Atlantean children laughing in crystal-clear waters. She later confessed that a feeling, warm and undeniable, had settled in her chest, a profound sense of loss for something she never knew she cherished. The community had not argued against progress. They had simply shown a deeper, more meaningful version of it. The decision to reroute the shipping lane to protect the sacred coast was announced to a silence that was not stunned, but deeply moved. It was a victory not of protest, but of profound persuasion, a moment that proved the soul of a lost civilization could still guide the hands of the present, ensuring its wisdom would echo in the laughter of future generations yet to come. The gentle hum of the village was no longer just a sound, but the very rhythm of its existence, a quiet pulse that resonated with the turning of the earth and the flow of the tides. Elara, her hair a silver crown and her eyes holding the soft light of the starfall blossoms, spent her days in the heart of the Harmonic garden. She was not a reclusive elder, but a living landmark, her presence a comfort to the children who would gather at her feet and the travelers who arrived with hopeful hearts. They came not to a monument, but to a person, eager to hear the tales from the one who had first listened to the sea's ancient song. She never tired of sharing, for each telling felt like watering a seed, watching a new understanding bloom in a listener's eyes. In these quiet moments of reflection, surrounded by the tangible proof of their community's choice, she understood the sunken city's truest secret. Its greatest gift was never the crystalline towers or the singing stones, but this simple, profound reminder that harmony is not a destination to be reached, but a practice to be chosen, again and again, with every sunrise and every kind word. It is a conscious decision to listen, to share, and to weave your own unique thread into the enduring tapestry of history. The village itself had become the tapestry, its patterns studied and adopted in distant lands, its practices of mindful stewardship rippling out to influence global conversations about how we live with our world. The legacy of Atlantis was no longer a fixed story in a book, but a living, breathing philosophy that evolved with each new guardian who took up the mantle, each new child who learned to trace the spirals of connection. And as the soft glow of shared memories illuminated the evening air, blending with the whisper of the sea and the resonant hum of the plants, it was clear this cozy, enduring inspiration would never fade. The legends were safe, not locked away in a vault, but carried forward in the beating hearts of all who chose to remember, a timeless whisper of balance for generations yet to dream.